Moi, mon plus grand regret, c'est d'avoir passé une bonne partie de ma jeunesse à écouter des radios comme RFI, France 24. J'ai été dans des pays où ces radios étaient fermées. Mais on prenait des applications, on enregistre leur journal pour écouter. Mais à partir d'un moment, il y a un déclic. Et je commence à comprendre qu'ils conditionnent nos cerveaux pour accepter ce qu'ils veulent.
What happens when a young captain dares to defy empires and rewrite Africa's story overnight? That's exactly what Ibrahim Traoré did, and the world hasn't stopped whispering his name since. But why do millions call him Africa's most fearless leader? Let's find that out. Let's take you a few years back. The night was ordinary until it wasn't. Burkina Faso, a landlocked nation often ignored in international headlines, suddenly became the center of the world's attention. A young officer barely 34 appeared on national television in full military fatigues. Calm voice, unshaken eyes, no hesitation in his tone. Burkina Faso will no longer be a pawn, he declared, as if the statement had been rehearsed, not for weeks, but for centuries. Within hours, the global press rushed to cover it. Coup in West Africa, the headlines screamed, dripping with panic and suspicion. But what unfolded on the ground told a very different story. Crowds didn't scatter in fear. They surged forward with relief. In Ouagadougou, people danced with unfiltered joy, some waving the Burkina flag high, others holding portraits of Thomas Sankara, the revolutionary leader assassinated decades earlier, whose ghost still haunted the nation. To the people, the coup was not a seizure of power. It was the reclamation of a dream. The city, usually weary and tense under years of insurgent attacks and economic despair, roared with the chance of liberation. Western diplomats issued their rehearsed condemnations, warning of instability, urging a return to constitutional order, but their words fell hollow against the images spreading like wildfire across African social media. The young captain's face, stern yet oddly serene, was plastered on posters and memes, celebrated as the man who dared to say enough. While the West saw danger, millions across Africa saw courage. They saw a break in the silence, a refusal to continue with the slow suffocation of dependency. What made the moment so shocking was not merely that Traore had taken power, but the timing and the boldness of it all. Burkina Faso was already reeling from relentless insurgent attacks. Its citizens are tired of funerals and broken promises. The government before him had pledged reforms, but people watched as villages burned and promises dissolved into dust. Into this void stepped Traoré, not with polished diplomacy, but with an unflinching decision to act. The very swiftness of his rise suggested something rare in politics: conviction over calculation. This wasn't just a national event. It was a continental tremor. From Lagos to Nairobi, from Kinshasa to Johannesburg, Africans debated the spectacle. Was this the beginning of a new era of fearless leadership, or another doomed chapter in the history of military takeovers? The split was clear. Elites feared what this example could inspire. Ordinary citizens, however, felt a surge of ownership. At long last, someone had stood up, not for foreign approval, but for African dignity. And this was the essence of the breaking news. Not simply that power had changed hands in Burkina Faso, but that a narrative had cracked open. For decades, coups in Africa were cast as tragedies of corruption or desperation. This one looked, at least to millions, like an act of redemption. The chants of the crowd captured it best. Our country is ours again. But beneath the celebrations lay a bigger question. What truly makes a leader fearless? Is it the ability to seize power, or the courage to hold it against the storms that inevitably follow? The world had seen Traore's opening move. The harder test was still to come, and Traore proved himself in less than 3 years. Now let's move to the present, and see how Traore actually proved himself as the most fearless leader of all time. Fearlessness is a word easily thrown around in politics, often used to romanticize reckless decisions or cloak ambition in the language of courage. But what happened in Burkina Faso raises a deeper question. What does fearlessness actually look like when lived by a leader not spoken by one? Ibrahim Traoré's rise forced millions to confront this question, because in him they saw not just a coup maker, but the embodiment of something far rarer, a man unshaken by the world's most intimidating powers. To understand this, we must strip fearlessness of its cliches. It is not the absence of fear, nor is it simply about physical bravery. Rather, it is clarity in the face of risk. It is the ability to see danger without being blinded by it. Traore in many ways represents this clarity. He was not groomed by foreign institutions, did not emerge from elite political families, and was not molded in Western capitals. His education was the barracks, his school, the battlefield. He lived the consequences of a nation starved of sovereignty, constant insecurity, economic suffocation, and the gnawing humiliation of dependency. For him, leadership was not a career move. It was survival dressed as duty. Fearlessness here means rejecting the easy path. He could have followed the well-trodden route of African officers before him, accepted foreign funding, stabilized his own comfort, and managed to decline quietly. Instead, he stepped into the storm and chose confrontation. It is this refusal to compromise with despair that millions recognize as different. The anatomy of his courage is rooted not in ideology alone, but in lead frustration and the shared wounds of his people. What separates Traore further is his relationship to time. Most leaders in fragile states delay hard choices, waiting for better conditions or international consensus. Traore does the opposite. He acts as though waiting is itself the enemy. To him, fear is not just about losing battles. It is about losing time, about condemning another generation to the same cycles of poverty and violence. This urgency explains why so many young Africans scrolling through their phones from Dar to Dar es Salaam find him magnetic. He mirrors their impatience, their refusal to settle for promises of a brighter future that never arrives. Yet fearlessness is not only about speed. It is also about acceptance. Traore appears to have accepted from the beginning that his choices would make him a marked man. Coup targets on backs and defying foreign powers sharpens the arrows. To act anyway requires a kind of liberation, the freedom that comes when a leader values principles more than longevity. In his public appearances, there's a calmness that unsettles even his opponents. The calm of someone who has already made peace with sacrifice. That calm is contagious. It tells the people, if I can face the storm, so can you. Still, fearlessness cannot remain an internal quality. It must be tested against external forces. And that is where the next chapter of Traoré's story begins. If clarity defines the anatomy of his courage, confrontation would become the battlefield where it is proved. Because sooner or later, defiance always collides with the empire. And so we must now ask, what happens when a young African leader's fearlessness crashes headlong into the weight of centuries-old powers? History teaches us that every fearless leader eventually meets the shadow of the empire. For Africa, the empire often wears the face of the West. Diplomatic smiles masking centuries of exploitation. Bases planted on soil that doesn't belong to them, and aid designed as chains rather than gifts. For Ibrahim Traoré, this clash arrived almost immediately after his rise. His refusal to bend did not exist in a vacuum. It was a direct challenge to the very architecture of control that France and its allies had maintained in West Africa for generations. The most explosive confrontation came with the French military presence. For years, French troops operated in Burkina Faso under the banner of fighting insurgents. Yet insurgent attacks continued to ravage villages, displacing thousands and leaving families shattered. To many Burkinabe, it seemed less like a solution and more like a permanent occupation. Traoré's decision to expel French forces was not just military. It was symbolic. He was dismantling a pillar of neo-colonial influence. Overnight, he shifted the balance. No longer would Burkina Faso outsource its security to a former colonizer. Western media outlets described this as reckless, as a gamble that endangered his country's stability. But on the streets, it was received as a moment of liberation. Citizens marched not in fear but in triumph, chanting slogans of independence as French convoys departed under the glare of local crowds. For many Africans watching across borders, the images were electrifying. This was not the language of appeasement, but of rupture. It told the world that an African leader could confront an empire hidden and still stand tall. But the clash was not limited to military matters. France's departure triggered economic consequences. Aid flows slowed, development projects were threatened, and international institutions began whispering about sanctions. In the West, the narrative painted Traoré as an unstable populist dragging his country into ruin. Yet in African discourse, the question was framed differently. How long must a continent remain dependent on outsiders to feed its own people, secure its own borders, and manage its own wealth? In this clash of interpretations, Traoré's defiance struck at something far deeper than policy. It struck at the psychology of dependency itself. What makes this confrontation even more significant is how Traoré chose to respond. Instead of retreating under pressure, he sought new alliances. He turned toward regional neighbors in Mali and Niger. Envisioning a coalition of sovereign states standing shoulder to shoulder, he opened doors to partnerships with Russia and China, not as masters, but as alternatives to Western monopoly. This reorientation alarmed Washington and Paris, who saw in his moves not just rebellion, but contagion, the possibility that other African nations might follow his path. And that fear was not unfounded. Across the continent, debates ignited. Could Ghana, Nigeria, or Senegal ever summon such defiance? Would Africa continue to live under the weight of external control? Or could a young captain's choices inspire a wider awakening? By confronting the empire openly, Traoré forced every African nation to look into the mirror and ask what sovereignty really means. Yet, the clash with the empire was only one half of the story. Saying no to foreign domination is powerful, but it cannot sustain a nation alone. What truly transforms a leader from defiant to visionary is the ability to build something in place of what was rejected. This raises the next question. Once the chains of empire are broken, what dream fills the vacuum? When the chains of empire are loosened, the question that follows is as old as liberation itself. Freedom for what? History is littered with revolutions that expelled foreign powers only to collapse inward, consumed by chaos or swallowed by compromise. Fearlessness, if it stops at rejection, risks becoming emptiness. Traoré seemed to grasp this instinctively. His speeches and decisions reveal a striking truth. He was not fighting merely to rescue Burkina Faso. He was daring to imagine a future for Africa itself. This dream took form in the language of unity. He spoke of a continent no longer carved into weak bargaining chips, but standing as one voice in the global order. For decades, Pan-Africanism had been the realm of nostalgic speeches and faded posters of leaders like Kwame Nkrumah and Thomas Sankara. Traoré gave it a new urgency. He did not treat unity as a distant ideal, but as a matter of survival. Insurgent economic exploitation and climate vulnerability were not national problems. They were continental wounds. Only continental solutions could heal them. To millions of Africans, especially the young, this struck a nerve. They had grown up watching their nations negotiate individually with superpowers, each too small to demand respect. each trapped in debt cycles and trade agreements tilted against them. When trade declared that Africa needed its own currency, its own institutions, its own capacity to defend itself, it sounded less like a slogan and more like common sense. Why should 1.4 billion people continue to live as fragmented subjects rather than as citizens of a unified force? But what gave weight to his vision was not rhetoric alone. He began pursuing tangible steps, aligning with Mali and Niger to form security coalitions, calling for regional resource management, and pushing the idea of joint industrial projects that would keep wealth inside Africa instead of leaking out. In his view, unity was not an emotional appeal, but an economic and political necessity. For Burkina Faso, a small and landlocked country, survival required solidarity. For Africa, survival required integration. This shift from confrontation with the empire to the building of alternatives was transformative. It told Africans that sovereignty is not only about saying no to outsiders, but also about saying yes to each other. Fearlessness became redefined again. Not just the courage to reject, but the courage to imagine boldly, to plan beyond borders that colonial rulers drew on maps. Of course, the dream was not without skeptics. Some argued that Traore's vision was unrealistic, that African unity had been tried and failed. Others warned that chasing grand continental projects could distract from urgent domestic issues like jobs, education, and infrastructure. Yet, even these criticisms revealed something important. His words had shifted the debate. Instead of asking whether Africa should unite, more people were now asking how it could be done. That shift of imagination is itself a kind of power. And here lies the connection back to fearlessness. For Traore, the true danger was not foreign armies or sanctions. The true danger was hopelessness. The belief that Africa must forever crawl instead of walk. By daring to dream larger than his nation, he was waging war not just on empire, but on despair. Still, one question remains unanswered. Is fearlessness only measured by vision? Or is it measured by the way people respond to that vision? To understand why millions call him Africa's most fearless leader, we must look not only at his actions, but at the resonance he has stirred in hearts across the continent. If vision is the spark, resonance is the fire. A leader's ideas only matter when they move people to believe, to act, to see themselves differently. Ibrahim Traoré's words and decisions have done precisely this. They have reshaped how millions of Africans imagine leadership, courage, and even themselves. His fearlessness is not simply his own. It has become a mirror reflecting to people what they long suspected, that Africa's destiny can change if its leaders stop bowing their heads. Across the continent, his image has spread in unexpected ways. In youth movements in Senegal, posters of Traore appear alongside slogans demanding dignity. In discussions in Nigeria, university students debate whether their country could produce someone with his clarity and boldness. In South Africa, radio callers compare him to the firebrand revolutionaries of their past. Social media, that amplifier of both myth and truth, has made him larger than life. Memes portray him as unshakable, standing firm against storms. Videos of his speeches circulate with captions calling him Africa's lion. For a generation accustomed to leaders who sound hesitant or transactional, Traore appears unwavering. But why does this matter so deeply? Africa has endured decades of leaders who played survival games rather than transformation games. Too many presidents have measured success by how long they remained in office, not by how much dignity they restored to their people. Against this backdrop, Traore looks anomalous. His willingness to risk international isolation, his calm embrace of danger, and his refusal to retreat under pressure are qualities that stand out precisely because they are so rare. He has reset the standard by which leadership is judged. Yet, the most remarkable part of his story is not how the powerful see him, but how the powerless feel him. Farmers in Burkina Faso, who once felt abandoned to poverty and terror, now speak of him as someone who carries their anger and their hope. Young Africans struggling to find work see in him not a savior, but proof that courage is possible, even in a rigged system. His appeal is not based on promises of instant prosperity. It is based on the recognition of dignity as non-negotiable. And dignity, once awakened, is contagious. This is why millions call him the most fearless. Not because he is invincible, but because he is vulnerable and chooses to act anyway. They see a man fully aware of the risks. Coups are fragile. Assassinations are possible. Economic retaliation is certain yet unbroken by them. That acceptance of risk lived so publicly grants him a moral authority that no amount of propaganda can manufacture. It transforms him from a politician into a symbol. Symbols, however, are double-edged. They inspire, but they also provoke fear in those who benefit from the old order. For Western powers, Traore's popularity is troubling, not because Burkina Faso is large or wealthy, but because symbols spread. His example could embolden others, fueling a wave of defiance that makes Africa harder to control. For local elites, his presence is unsettling because it exposes their compromises. By comparison, their caution looks like cowardice. The story then comes full circle. Fearlessness is not a single act, not even a single coup or speech. It is a chain of decisions that when linked together form a philosophy. Ibrahim Traoré's philosophy is simple. Freedom before comfort, dignity before aid, unity before silence. Millions call him fearless because he dares to live by that philosophy openly and because in his defiance they rediscover their own. And that may be the truest measure of leadership. Not how loudly history remembers your name, but how deeply it changes the way people believe in themselves. Do you believe Ibrahim Traoré's fearlessness can truly reshape Africa's future? Let us know in the comments section. Is he a symbol of hope or a threat to the powers that fear change? Do you want to watch more videos like this one? If so, subscribe to our channel and press the bell icon next to it. We have decided to bring videos on something nobody talks about. Thanks for watching, and until the next video, stay tuned.